In science, when an experiment ends, its outcome may be quite different from that intended or expected. This is not always a failure so much as it is a data point for future experiments. A number of expectations were met, and a few important ones, unfortunately, were not. I've decided that for me, one experiment to bring science into the Bigfoot circus is over. I don't look upon this as a failure, but as a learning experience. I harbor no ill will to anyone in this. Everyone did exactly the best they could along the way. No one could really ask more of anyone. It has been said that for some reason, there are people who choose not to hear the truth about untrustworthy sources. In fact, there are many different reasons, and that's for another essay, probably several essays. Look up information silo to know more about just one of these. People in a silo cannot be reached in general, and will usually resist attempts to reach to them. They have to reach out of their silo first. I look upon everyone who can be reached as something rare and precious, everything learned by anyone to be valuable. The others will require a great deal of patience and kindness, things not found much in Bigfoot world. I am changing what I'm doing because of the lack of anyone at all who seemed to both grasp the ideas being presented and was interested enough to participate more actively. This is just the end of one idea, and it's the beginning of another. The ignorant may see this as some kind of a rift or as infighting, because that's what they want it to be. They should develop a little maturity. It's the wrong way to view this, and so before I dig into the essay, there are some things that need to be said directly and clearly to diffuse that perception.
Greetings, good citizens. Now let's get on with the prologue.
This group of friends has frequently encouraged those around us to do what each thinks is right. This has not changed. In particular, some may see this as a takedown of one or more individuals. It's not. Everyone is doing what they believe to be right, and to be the best use of their time and resources. It takes a couple of years or more for a brain to really adapt to new ideas, less with continuous exposure. Maybe something of all this can keep working, slowly, gradually. At the bottom line, though, there are much more effective ways for me to move forward, but this is yet another essay from this one. You should also be aware that I am speaking only for myself. I do not presume to speak for Leon in anything that he has not openly stated for all to hear. Leon also has a different ongoing project in this circus. This is nothing more than the documentation of a path not taken. It's not a rebuke of any person so much as it is of the collective farce of Bigfootery and social media. The path was not taken by many people, not just one, not just some, due mostly to the impatience and the profound confidence they express in understanding of things that are clearly not actually understood. There's a name for that, isn't there? Humans are born curious. It takes effort to shut down that curiosity in life. If part of this is incuriosity, how did that develop so deeply in so many? Probably a whole series of essays right there. Being prescient, I hear a variety of protests to the effect of, "You should have just said so before." You need to understand that we did. Today, I'm just opening a door for you. If someday you grasp the meaning of where this clown car could have gone, you'll realize that we did tell you. Many people did grasp some sense of what was going on. Some did not, and some didn't even realize something was going on. All of them were welcome to take part. There is a saying that we can show you the door, but you have to go through it. This is related to the idea I try to convey that knowledge is a journey, not a destination. Mastery of a concept cannot simply be just teleported into a brain.
I know Kung Fu.
To extend this metaphor, if we simply open the door for those too impatient to figure out keys and combinations and locks and doorknobs for themselves, the content of that room loses much or all of its meaning. You're in the same place, but you took a shortcut on the journey, and the quality and the depth of what you skipped over will be lost in doing so. You may never learn what you lost when someone simply opens the door for you.
See, that's what you do with doors. You pass through. You really got to get yourself up to speed with modern technology.
A couple of weeks ago, I saw a t-shirt. I used to be a people person. People ruined it for me. For now, I just don't have the capacity to try and start this over somewhere else. And for his part, Leon is struggling to regain a great deal of capacity lost in the medical incident earlier this year. And he has expressed openly that he just does not have the capacity to pretend in the face of the madness anymore. If you're not familiar with Carl Sagan's science investigation parable called The Dragon in the Garage, and especially the discussion after the story is done, I suggest that you pause here and follow the link in the pinned comment before moving forward. At least watch it afterwards. This version of the parable has everything you need to hear. I emphasize the discussion at the end for the even-handed approach to unfounded claims that anyone who wants to do this well should be able to muster. If you are unable to muster the capacity for this minimal kind of civil behavior, then this science thing really may simply not be your cup of tea. It's certainly not for everyone, and that too is okay. Bigfoot and social media is a metaphor for life. There are little dramas that play out over and over, repeating every few months.
All of this has happened before. All of this will happen again.
Like productions of a village theater. If the story is a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, the roles of characters in the play, like Pseudolus or Mille Gloriosus, are important for the mantles they represent, but not the names of the actors who take up the mantles for a given production. There are often minor variations in the presentation from one to the next.
Oh, heck, it's the same dance, it's just a different tune.
But the story is always recognizable. To borrow from Macbeth, life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets their hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing. There are many such tales in the Bigfoot circus and many little dramas. That's yet another essay. When I produce a report for a client, the first section is typically the conclusion. This permits management to take in a summary of their information quickly and leaves all of the details for those who really need them and bother to read further. This essay has some of the conclusions from the experiment I mentioned before, but there are around 3 years of observations probing into a broad variety of subjects. I will take a number of essays to flesh out all of these ideas. I am changing tack from here forward, creating a series of essays in Bigfoot Studies, or Bigfoot Science, if you will. Either way, it shortens to BS, which is simply meant as an obvious joke. Outlined in the manner of some college curriculum, each essay will have topic and title. Some topics may end up with multiple essays. This first entry, for example, is BS078-01, titled Bigfoot World and the Assassination of Science. It could easily find other essays exploring the rejection of scientific thinking and processes. Around 2 years ago now, a couple of people actually versed in the practice of real science thought it might be interesting to try to show the Bigfoot circus what real science could do for them in the understanding of what's going on around them. This science group said clearly and plainly that anyone is welcome to take part in this exercise of real science. They also said that anyone who came to the table would be questioned regarding their story and experiences and what they were doing there. They also said that anyone who made extraordinary claims would eventually be faced with extraordinary examination to support them. Those were our only real rules. And, as with all things in social media, some did not understand what was going on. Something to bear in mind through all of this would be the concept of the one-room schoolhouse. In those parts of social media freely available to all, there are no boundaries, there are no filters, other than the algorithms feeding links to content consumers. Those who access the content have the full range of interests, background, education, and capacities for comprehension. Not everyone will fully grasp the concept intended behind any given content. This is beneficial for artistic and creative content, but creates challenges for technical or educational content where the original intent is usually critical. For reasons I will cover in other essays, we knew many would not participate, and many would only participate by watching. A few by taking part in the chats, and very few would even join into the live streams. We knew some would stumble in by accident and be shocked at what they found.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
We also knew that some might try their hand at fooling science. None actually succeeded, though some of you clearly missed what was really happening. Others came to learn, and we helped them. I do believe everyone learned something. Some obviously did not grasp the depth of what the science group was trying to do. They do claim to completely understand what it was about, but also clearly do not. There's a name for that, isn't there? Of course, nobody can truly understand that which is not said. Of those I have asked about a recent chapter in the last few weeks, all have a healthy outlook on what happened. Every single one. None knew it all, of course. How could they possibly be expected to? Yet there are certainly some who just did not share a healthy experience from this. It really takes a couple of years or more for a brain to adapt to new ideas. What did Bigfoot World do with this idea? They got impatient, frustrated, took it behind the barn, shot it in the head like anything else they don't understand and don't want to deal with, and declared victory for critical thinking. All those Bigfoot storytime channels that mock all them critical thinkers out there are totally correct in their mockery. All they have ever really seen is long on the critical and short on the other part. To the greatest extent, this is all the circus can muster. Perhaps the only hope is outside the circus, to put it simply. Why walk away from this part of the project? Think clearly, rationally, and objectively about that original idea and what it has become twisted into. Can you possibly imagine the idea of anyone actually believing they would be made welcome in the environment that has been created now? Knowing that I am clearly associated with that, what does that do to the credibility of the original invitation? No, this idea is dead. The community doesn't have the capacity to accept real science in any meaningful way that can live without constant maintenance. It's effectively unable to leave the intensive care unit. That's okay. It's part of being human. It's expected, at least of some, even if it is disappointing. Everyone brings their own baggage to any activity they take part in, even if they're just listening, but some travel lighter than others. The science group was, of course, aware of the idea of what started being called some kind of critical thinking group. This is your invention. This is not what they were doing. Remember, this was to be a learning experiment. They knew there would be people who didn't quite get all the ideas right away.
As with all living things, each according to his gifts.
This is just part of being human. It is expected, and it's okay. If there actually were a group of objective, rational thinking skeptics trying to bring these ideas into the community, They would not be telling you what to think, who to believe, who to listen to, who to ignore, who to trust, and what to do about it all.
From knowledge and defense, never attack.
They would not be trying to control you to save you. What they would do is promote the basic ideas of scientific thinking as tools of the mind for those interested in learning them, helping them to learn to decide for themselves what may be worth looking into or what may be unreliable information, offering, as it were, the tools to save themselves if they would bother to pick them up and examine them. A quiet and calming voice in the madness. They would know and accept that those watching freely available content in social media will not all share the same background and knowledge, education, or skills of comprehension. Most who hear it will simply not be listening to the intended message. If the idea were given time, many more would have grasped the concepts more correctly. This would help them not only in the world of Bigfootery, but also to more solidly navigate their whole lives. They would be empowered with these tools to help others to understand them better. But some are just too impatient for these things, aren't they?
Are we there yet?
No.
Are we there yet?
No.
Are we there yet?
No.
There was no specific plan. The course would change based on who tried to attach themselves to the ideas being promoted. Each of those people come with their own ideas, their own agendas, and each developed their own understanding of what their role was. Only they would be able to say what they thought they were part of. The role of the science group was to observe what happened and work what was happening into the message. It started with the promotion of the basic concepts of scientific thinking and teaching them gently and with patience, objectivity, rational thinking, healthy skepticism. As characters joined this unwritten play, the science group adapted to what others brought to the table, so to speak. They maintained a professional comportment, being polite with anyone who stepped in. Just to be clear, this is part of the everyone is welcome to participate thing. Nobody is a waste of time. Remember, this is social media, and in an area with unbounded access. Those who encounter it have the whole spectrum of capacity for understanding things. It was always understood that some people are unable to grasp the idea that being polite and professional is not the same thing as some kind of an endorsement. Everyone has different capacities of understanding what happens around them. Remember the dragon in the garage parable. They will treat anyone who comes to the table seriously, will listen to what they present. If they're researchers trying to collect better information, the group will offer sincere and serious help to collect better data or to learn to evolve their experiences into data that might become evidence. Over time, everyone watching would see if they would try these things or not. All would see if they managed to produce evidence or not. All along, also pointing out the traits and behaviors that may be apparent from people trying to be misleading. These things do not happen over just a few days or weeks. They are not for the impatient or the hot-headed. You are watching the vetting process unfold politely, respectfully, gradually, inevitably. All along promoting the practice of rational thinking, objectivity, and healthy skepticism. It takes a couple of years or more for a brain to really adapt to new ideas, patiently, gradually. If there are witnesses or experiencers who want to understand what really happened to them, the group will help them to walk through their experience and help them to navigate the experiences in a healthy way. Many people telling their Bigfoot stories do not like to be questioned, mostly because they've never thought that much about details they never thought to imagine. As different situations evolved, the science group also introduced cognitive dissonance to help those watching realize when something was amiss. This increased as suspicions grew and more so-called red flags continued to appear surrounding a couple of people who persisted at the table. Once again, this is freely available social media content. It was totally understood that some would lack the capacity to grasp that. That's just part of being human. It's expected. It's okay. Remember, they also said that they did not care about more people in social media. They wanted to find the right people. They didn't define it clearly at the time. It wasn't spelled out. But the right people are those who learn in this environment to understand the things that they are seeing, those who have the capacity to grasp the message and free themselves from the madness. I firmly believe that the only truly effective way to teach the principles of science, the principles of discovery, is for those learning to be helped to discover these skills for themselves. Allow them to learn to open the door on their own and grow from that experience. What better way to do so than to have at hand an example of what to look for right on the screen with the science groups, smiling smugly as the science group points out the red flags that apply to them for those bothering to pay attention and learn from it.
One of these things is not like the others.
So some learn to recognize for themselves what is happening. To realize for themselves that not only is the group talking to someone who is almost certainly not a reliable source of information, but also can be polite and civil in doing so. If you can believe it, there are those in social media who lack the capacities of civil behavior. We've never run across any of those along the way, have we? I've been asked if I liked certain people involved in this chapter. It was asked in a way that suggested that liking someone had anything to do with believing them. When anyone asks that kind of question, I wonder if they themselves like to give people a pass on things they may suspect in other people that they don't like. That would be something similar to selection bias, wouldn't it? Would that bias then affect their decisions and their work based on whether or not they like someone? I suppose that goes along with the simplistic idea that being professional is an endorsement. For the record, just in case this is too confusing for some people, I do not tend to like those who try deliberately to mislead people. Liking them or believing them has nothing to do with being professional when interacting with them in a public forum. Realize that while good behavior is always good and lying is always bad, sometimes civil behavior is not entirely honest.
You lie, you tell the truth, but you cannot, for you lie.
It's merely polite. Real and effective education takes a long time. It takes even longer in a population that has been conditioned to be suspicious of ways of thinking that might lead them to be free of that conditioning. Listen to my recent essay regarding artificial intelligence for how that is shaped in social media. The science group wanted to create a place where people could observe and learn for themselves the principles of scientific thinking, to learn for themselves that science is not a monstrous mechanism of destruction to them, to learn that people who live and practice science can be professional, polite, and even kind and approachable, to learn that people who live and practice science will seek to set aside whatever is irrelevant and work to find what is rational and objective using healthy skepticism, that science can be tactful but is not interested in the distractions of fabrication and misinformation. It is true that some people use science like a blunt force weapon. If the only tool you recognize is a hammer, then everything that you use it on becomes a nail. This is a reflection of that person only, and their capacity for not being constructive. It is not particularly objective, not rational, and not healthy. It takes a couple of years for a brain to really adapt to new ideas, less with continuous exposure. Many learn quickly to misuse these tools.
But this year more seductive.
Long on the critical, short on the other part. Still, there is no real evidence any of that took root in any meaningful form, and there should be by this point. If some people have their curiosity, do they hold it back for some reason? This is probably a subject for yet another essay. The environment for this to happen in must not be associated with those who have the goal of discrediting people with open social violence. This kind of spectacle will drive away the very people we want to help most. Those who cannot be convinced by mere evidence of bad behavior, but who might learn to reason it out for themselves, given patience and kindness and support to think on their own, without being told who to listen to and who to believe and who to ignore. If done correctly, most would not even be aware that they are effectively in a class. They would just be in a Bigfoot-related live stream or other content, with the message being gently and consistently presented and reinforced by the behavior of the group, teaching by example. Some will learn faster than others, and some will never hear the message. Some may become confused about the group discussing things to look out for with unreliable sources, while they're interacting in an amicable way with some of those very sources. This is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. I'll have a whole other essay about cognitive dissonance. For this to happen properly, it must be allowed to grow naturally within the community, supported by those who have the capacities to let it live on its own. Those people never showed up. Maybe they don't exist in the community. Maybe, instead of a village, you really need an asylum after all. The real goal of the science group was to help people navigate life better, not just the Bigfoot circus. To do so while being civil and professional with others, regardless of what they may think. For this, they are chastised by the impatient for all the time they caused people to waste and the people they harmed. This is absolute rubbish, and for yet another essay. Nothing in this is hidden or swept under the rug, as some seem to say. It's unfortunate that sometimes content gets removed or deleted, but that's also a part of life. When they move on, however, they do simply leave broken things behind on the trail. Anyone who cares to explore that trail is welcome to do so, at least the parts that remain available. I do want to address, from my perspective, this notion of a critical thinking group. The first things I want to ask you are, who started the group? Who was in charge? Who was in? Who was out? Who makes that judgment? Who is qualified to make that judgment, and why? And did you miss the part about anyone being welcome? There were 3 attempts to actually create a group. Each was started by some channel or podcast that saw benefit to themselves exploiting people talking about real science and Bigfootery. Each of these was an abject failure for the inclusion of people eminently unqualified to participate in such a venture. In one of these, the host of a Monsters and Mysteries genre podcast realized that his crackpot team of Bigfoot field investigators would not stand up well to serious examination. That idea was abandoned like a boat on fire. Another included personality who had recently come into the scene with some insignificant fury. They were sharp enough to realize the clear and present danger of serious examination of what they were doing and quickly excused themselves, saying something about how it would not be appropriate for them to be part of such a venture at that time. I honestly think that more true words may not have been spoken in the history of Bigfootery. The third was the longest running, there from the beginning, and the host of the channel that just never learned. That situation aged like fine milk. This is really the only actual ejection from the idea, because the host is still unable to recognize their own lack of fitness to the task. None of these names matter to the future. The variations on a theme are that, in general, Bigfooter podcasts have severe allergies to real scientific examination, and they know it. And they all try to hide it. They each show a clear capacity for rational thinking regarding their audience and income streams. These are the only things you need to remember into the future about all of this. Along the way, There were several other channels that interviewed the people from the science group and soon recognized the clear and present danger to their way of life. Some deleted the content from public view, though they kept the content for paying members, actually invested literally in the Kool-Aid. Some were so threatened by the experience that they started priming their audiences for the upcoming war in Bigfoot world. They properly perceived the threat, but they had no understanding of markets in any practical sense, and they vastly overestimated the actual threat posed by the science group. Still another separate essay here. Those channels quickly turned to pseudoscience, has all the words and no actual rules. Their audience will never know the difference, but it lets them claim to have science in the mix, because it is science-y, isn't it? All these people and their channels were left behind on the trail like broken toys, yet the science group harbors no ill will towards them. They simply don't stand up to examination, and they're not worth the honor of name. In fact, and to be perfectly honest here, I wish each of them, all the credulous and gullible subscribers and followers, even those who want to join or Patreon. That market deserves to exist. It will take yet another essay, maybe a series of them, to explain why this does not matter in the long run. Realize that no matter how long we may have tried, every single attempt to create an actual group of Bigfooters with real science in the mix was an abject failure for the Bigfooters. You may not have seen all of that going down, or been perceptive enough to notice it. But that's what I saw all along the way. That alone is why I would argue plainly there was no such critical thinking group except in the baggage some brought to the table themselves. What there was should be considered a loose association of people with common interests aligned well enough to benefit all involved in some way, and formed several valuable friendships along the way. That's the group that was formed over time. Sadly, there was only one investigator-researcher who tried their hand at challenging science. I say sadly because this was the path in which the science group actually hoped they might find someone who may actually have something interesting to bring to the table. But in the end, that never happened. Instead, we had from this one a fabulous example of what people should be wary of, though we did make good use of that while it lasted.
One of these things doesn't belong.
Proverbially speaking, he seemed to be planning to rent a backhoe in the process of digging his own grave for those perceptive enough to see what was going on. That would have been glorious to watch. Honestly, if the best explanation you can come up with was that he must have had us completely fooled because he was almost certainly being misleading, you do at least seem to have the situation half figured out. That's something you can be happy about. We'll work on the rest in another essay about cognitive dissonance. Absolutely anyone who tried to be associated with this science group came to the table for their own reasons, with their own goals and their own agendas. Only they can say what they thought they were really being part of. All of that is baggage that they brought to the table themselves. Some ran screaming from the realization of what was happening. Certainly more scuttled silently back into the darkness to lurk elsewhere without ever making their presence known. Those who have approached me on the side, looking for ways to look at various potential evidence, or how to collect it better, know that I will take that very seriously and give it genuine interest and value for time. Most know that with bitterness, because they had nothing of value and were not interested in actually doing better. They merely wanted to confirm their own cherished beliefs. Very few, precious few, know it because they brought something genuinely interesting to the table that's worth pursuing further and are interested in doing better and knowing more. Correspondence with these people is like a warm summer afternoon with a clear blue sky and a cool breeze. If anyone feels triggered by any of this, it might be a good idea for you to explore why that is. But don't worry, you'll figure it out for yourself that I am just bitter or jealous or something like that.
As soon as you step outside that door, you'll feel right as rain.
And if that is what you actually come up with, you probably ought to look in a mirror with that. As I told a friend recently, you should go ahead and believe whatever you need to. But your confusion may be a clue that something beyond what you think you understand is actually going on. There may be something along the way that you missed in your confidence. Don't you just hate it in games where you walk right past something that you need and have to go almost all the way back to the beginning to find the trinket that allows you to open the door to the next level? Yeah, done that before. Metaphorically, too. For the rest of you, there is so much to explore, and I still have no more free time coming up.
Want to take a ride?
This summer, I also ran across more nonsense, if you can imagine that, about DNA and infrasound, audio evidence, and several other things. When inspired to do so, I will add a topic to the curriculum and help you understand what is so deeply flawed in these ideas and how they might be more constructively approached if you were actually interested as a researcher in the subject. Will I offer these ideas to the misguided fools who inspire them? Of course not. I have found that people presenting this kind of misinformed crap are uninterested in having their narratives corrected. This material is for your benefit, my audience, to identify crap for yourself and maybe be able to do better than them if you're so inclined. Believe it or not, Bigfootery is rife with arrogance and self-righteousness.
Other people's might make you sick, but not your own.
If all this makes you think that I have a terribly low opinion of the whole thing, realize that I keep trying. I do so because those who can be reached out there are rare and precious. Science has stunningly profound ways to humble people. Believe that I know this well. A friend at work recently asked me about this hobby. I pointed him to some of the more well-done work that I was aware of. A few weeks later, I asked if he had had a chance to look at those links I sent. He said he was not able to watch more than a few minutes of any of it, and asked how I could put up with it at all. That is how much of the world thinks of this circus. My answer was that most of the world is not privileged with the education and experience that he and I have been exposed to in our lives. These are perfectly normal people, many of whom have had some experiences they cannot explain, as I have, and they're trying to navigate those experiences without much good help. I reminded him of the dragon in the garage, and if nothing else, the wonder of all these people experiencing such similar things. I am the curious cryptid, and it is for the lack of anyone who understood what we wanted to do well enough to step forward and take part that leads to this change. For this idea to take root, there have to be those who nurture it within the community. They never came to the table, and that's okay. It's part of being human, and, even if disappointing, it's not entirely unexpected. This journey was well worth the time along the way. The Bigfoot Circus, collectively, may not have the capacity to accept real science in any meaningful way, but some of you might. So, let's keep exploring that way.